My name is Maren. I was 39 years old when I learned that saving my husband's life had given him everything he needed to take mine apart. Colin's cancer treatment had cost us exactly $320,000. I sold the house I had owned before our marriage. I sold my paid-off SUV and began measuring every trip by bus schedules and borrowed rides. I sold my engagement ring and wedding band to a jeweler who placed them on a black cloth, studied them through a lens, and named the price of 14 years in less than a minute. When those things were gone, I emptied what remained of our savings and retirement money. I did it because Colin had relapsed, because his doctors had found a treatment that might still save him, and because waiting for our insurer to finish arguing over coverage could have cost him the chance to receive it. The treatment worked. On the morning his specialist confirmed remission, I sat beside Colin in a consultation room at Riverton's Cancer Center and gripped the empty place on my left hand. For months, I had imagined that appointment as the point when our family would begin again. Beginning again did not mean replacing what we had sold. I knew the house belonged to someone else. The rings were gone, and rebuilding savings would take years. I meant eating dinner with Lacey and Theo without calculating the distance to an emergency department. I meant letting the phone ring without expecting a doctor. I meant Colin waking beside me and speaking about next summer as if he expected to see it. Colin barely looked at me. He thanked the doctor, asked about returning to work, and stood before I had finished putting the scan report into the blue treatment binder I had carried through every admission and appeal. In the hallway, I tried to take his arm. We should call the kids together. He moved just far enough away that my hand fell between us. They already know the scan was good. That answer unsettled me, but I explained it to myself. Colin had spent more than a year being examined, monitored, touched, and spoken about as if his body belonged to a team of strangers. I thought he needed room to feel like himself again. I did not understand that he had already built a version of himself that had no room for me. By 4 that afternoon, Colin was waiting inside the furnished townhouse Bellcraft Interiors used for relocating executives. Bellcraft was his family's company. I had believed we were staying there temporarily because our own house was gone and Colin needed to remain near the cancer center. 2 folders rested on the glass coffee table. The first contained divorce papers. The second contained a temporary custody order. I read Colin's name, then mine, then the names of our 12-year-old daughter, Lacey, and our 8-year-old son, Theo. The words would not stay still long enough to become meaning. "Where are the children?" I asked. "They're safe." "Where?" "My father has them until I finish here." I reached for my phone. Colin's hand covered the folders, not the phone, as though the papers were the thing he feared I might take. "You can speak to them after you've read the order." It was not a final custody decision. It was a short emergency order based on statements Colin had submitted before telling me our marriage was over. He had collected Lacey and Theo from school that afternoon using authority granted in the filing. An expedited review would follow, but for that night, he had possession of our children and a document warning me not to interfere. I read that paragraph 3 times. My body kept preparing for an emergency my mind could not locate. I checked the date, convinced there had been an error, and realized Colin had signed his affidavit 9 days earlier. 9 days earlier, I had driven him to blood work and waited outside with coffee because he said he was too tired to go alone. While I was tracking his counts, he had been documenting reasons to remove me from our children. I searched the pages for the emergency he had described. He had listed my part-time income, the fact that I no longer owned a car, and my lack of a permanent address. He had mentioned a message I sent during the worst week of his treatment, saying I could not keep doing this. He had not included what this meant. He had not explained the insurer, the hospital deposits, 3 nights without sleep, or the house I had sold to keep him alive. Every sacrifice appeared on those pages as evidence that I was unstable. "You did this before today," I said. Colin's face stayed composed. He looked stronger than he had in months. His hair had grown back enough to lie neatly against his head. The company had given him a vehicle, the townhouse, and a path back to full-time work. On paper, he had rebuilt his life. On paper, I had lost mine. The children need stability, he said. They need their mother. They need more than someone who knows how to manage a crisis. I stared at him. What does that mean? His answer came without hesitation. I want a real woman now. For a few seconds, I heard nothing after that. Not the furnace, not traffic beyond the windows, not even the vibration of my phone as I tried calling Douglas, Colin's father. I remembered helping Colin stand when the treatment left his legs too weak. I remembered changing sheets at 2 a.m, appealing denials from hospital corridors, and telling our children that fear did not mean we were giving up. I remembered the jeweler sliding my rings away. None of it had made me real to him. I asked to see Lacey and Theo. Colin refused an in-person visit and allowed one short call. Lacey's voice was careful. Dad says you need somewhere to stay. Theo asked whether I had sold our house because I did not want it anymore. I told them I loved them. I told them they had done nothing wrong. Before I could explain anything else, Colin ended the call. The townhouse had never been ours. It belonged to Belcraft, and Colin had arranged the occupancy in his name. The short-term apartment we had used near the hospital was no longer available. By 7 that evening, everything I still possessed fit into 2 suitcases, a canvas tote, and the blue binder. I checked into an extended stay hotel close to the children's school. The room was clean. That almost made it worse. There was a narrow bed, a laminate desk, 2 wrapped drinking cups, and a kitchenette with exactly 2 forks. I set the binder beside the television and placed my hotel key card on top of it so I would not lose the only key that opened anything for me. The second bed was a sofa that pulled out beneath the window. I unfolded it halfway before remembering Lacey and Theo were not coming. At home, Theo needed the hall light left on, and Lacey pretended she was too old to wait for me to say goodnight. In that room, there was no hallway, no familiar door, and no reason to leave a light burning for anyone. I called Colin twice. I sent one message asking to speak to the children before bed. He replied that further communication should follow the order. I opened the binder because organizing facts was the only way I knew to keep panic from becoming movement. The treatment calendar was in the front. Behind it were denial letters, payment confirmations, medication lists, and the closing statement from my house. I ran my finger across the date beside my signature. Someone knocked on the hotel door. It was after 10. I had not told friends where I was. Colin knew the hotel name because it appeared in the message I sent about the children, but he had made it clear he did not intend to come. The knock came again, quieter this time. I looked through the peephole and saw Jocelyn Bell. Colin's younger sister stood in the corridor holding a thick document envelope against her chest. Jocelyn was Belcraft's controller. She had helped with school pickups during treatment and corrected hospital invoices when I became too tired to find the errors. She was also the person who had spent her life cleaning up financial consequences after Colin made bold decisions. Jocelyn and I had never been the kind of sisters-in-law who called each other to talk. Our trust had been practical. She knew I would remember a deadline. I knew she would never pretend a number balanced when it did not. During treatment, she had sat with Theo through a school concert Colin and I could not attend, then sent me the entire recording without adding a word about what I had missed. When I opened the door, she did not ask to come inside. Lacey contacted me, she said. She doesn't understand why Colin won't let her talk to you. Neither do I. Jocelyn looked at the binder on the desk behind me. Then she looked at my bare hand. There's something you need to know before you speak to him again. I waited. Her fingers tightened around the envelope. The insurance appeal was approved before you closed on the house. I thought I had misunderstood her. No, it was still pending. That's what Colin told you. Jocelyn said the approval had authorized a reimbursement of $214,000. Colin received notice before I signed the final closing documents. Correspondence connected to the payment had been routed through Belcraft, which was how she knew. Where is the money? I asked. I don't know where all of it is now. How long have you known? Jocelyn lowered her eyes. That was when I understood the envelope was not only evidence against Colin, it was evidence of her silence. Before I explain what she brought into that hotel room and why I did not call Colin after hearing it, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and like this video. Stories like mine can feel isolating while they are happening. Being part of this community is one way we remind each other to look past appearances, follow the facts, and keep listening when someone's sacrifice is being used against them. To understand why I trusted Colin with everything, I have to go back 16 years, before cancer, before the blue binder, and before my house became a line on a medical ledger. Back then, the brass key in my hand still opened the first home I had ever owned. I bought the house when I was 27, 3 years before I married Colin. It was a narrow brick place in an older Riverton neighborhood with worn oak floors and a kitchen that had not been updated since the 80s. The upstairs bathroom leaned slightly toward the tub. The back fence had 3 different kinds of wood because the previous owner repaired one board at a time. None of that mattered to me. The day I signed the mortgage, I stood on the front step and turned the brass key 3 times simply because I could. No one had given me the down payment. I saved it while working in accounts payable at Riverton Mechanical Supply. I packed lunches, kept the same winter coat for 6 years, and took every overtime reconciliation the company offered. Homeownership did not make me wealthy. It gave me a place where another person's unreliability could not rearrange my life overnight. I had grown up with a mother who could be warm at breakfast and gone by dinner. She loved me, but her promises depended on what she felt capable of that day. I learned early that the safest person in a room was the one who needed the least. By adulthood, competence felt less like a skill than a form of shelter. That was part of what drew Colin to me. Bellcraft became one of our larger customers during my 2nd year in the house. Colin arrived one Tuesday to settle a dispute over custom hardware his company said we had billed twice. He was 32, confident without being loud, and carrying a folder that contained everything except the document he actually needed. "You're telling me I drove across town for a credit we already received?" he asked after I found the payment. "I'm telling you, the credit is on the statement you brought with you." He stared at the page, then laughed. Most people would have made me feel stupid first. "You did not give me enough time." He returned the following week with coffee and no accounting problem at all. Colin made certainty feel like rest. He chose restaurants without turning dinner into a committee meeting. He remembered the names of people I mentioned once. When the sink backed up during our 3rd month together, he arrived with tools, watched one repair video, and stayed until midnight, even after it became clear neither of us knew what we were doing. There were years when I could point to evidence that he loved me. He proposed in the unfinished kitchen, surrounded by cabinet doors we had removed for painting. After we married, he moved into my house and never called it mine. He said it was ours. We chose new floors together. He built shelves in the smallest bedroom before Lacey was born and slept in a chair beside me through Theo's difficult delivery. Our marriage was not a 14-year trick. That truth made what happened later harder, not easier. Colin's father, Douglas, founded Bellcraft and had spent his life measuring people by what they could carry without slowing down. He admired Colin's ability to sell an idea before anyone else had decided it was possible. Colin's younger sister, Jocelyn, became the controller because she was the person who made those ideas survive contact with arithmetic. At family dinners, Douglas asked Colin about clients and expansion. Then, as plates were being cleared, he handed Jocelyn a tax notice or vendor problem and said, "You'll sort this out." She always did. I recognized the role because I lived a version of it at home. Colin handled visible decisions. I remembered school forms, mortgage dates, prescriptions, birthday gifts, and which child needed reassurance before a dentist appointment. He was affectionate and involved. He taught Lacey to ride a bicycle and let Theo climb onto his shoulders whenever music played in the kitchen. But when something went wrong, everyone looked toward me before they knew they were doing it. Sunday pancakes became our family ritual. Colin made the first batch too thick. Lacey arranged strawberries into faces. Theo insisted every pancake needed one chocolate chip in the exact center. I kept extra batter ready because Colin always underestimated how much they would eat. Those mornings were ordinary. I did not understand how valuable ordinary could become. The ritual started because Colin burned breakfast on our first Sunday home with Lacey. She was 5 days old, I had slept in pieces, and he had confused baking soda with baking powder. We ate rubbery pancakes over the sink because sitting down felt like another task. The following week, he tried again. By the time Theo was old enough to demand his single chocolate chip, Sunday breakfast had become the one appointment nobody needed me to remember. It mattered that Colin could be reliable in visible, joyful ways. He coached Lacey's first soccer team, even though he did not understand the offside rule. He took Theo to the hardware store and came back with a birdhouse neither of them could assemble. At night, he made voices for storybook characters while I answered the last work emails at the kitchen counter. That division did not feel sinister. I liked being the person who could find the missing permission slip. Colin liked creating the memory everyone photographed. We each mistook familiarity for fairness because most days the system worked. Once, when I had pneumonia, Colin ran the house for 4 days. He brought the wrong snacks to school and shrank one of Lacey's sweaters, but everyone ate and got where they needed to go. I remember lying upstairs, listening to him laugh with the children, and thinking I had chosen a man who could carry us if I ever could not. Years later, when his filing described me as unable to provide stable care, that memory hurt almost as much as the lie. He knew competence was not something one parent owned. He had once proved it himself. Colin was first diagnosed with lymphoma 5 years before the relapse. The treatment was frightening but straightforward enough for our insurance to cover most of it. I made the first blue binder then. I divided it into appointments, medications, insurance, bills, and questions. It gave my hands something to do when fear had no useful direction. Colin hated being sick, but he did not hate me for seeing it. Not then. One night, after chemotherapy, he woke shaking and admitted he was afraid Lacey and Theo would remember him only as a man in a hospital bed. "They will remember you came home," I told him. He held my hand until the shaking stopped. When that treatment ended, Douglas gave a speech about Colin's strength. Jocelyn quietly corrected 3 insurer errors. I returned to work and filed the blue binder in the hall closet. We believed the crisis had ended. For almost 4 years, it had. Then Colin began waking soaked in sweat. He lost weight despite eating normally. A lump appeared near his collarbone. He told me it was an infection until I scheduled the appointment he kept postponing. The scan led to a biopsy. The biopsy led us to a consultation room at the Academic Cancer Center, 90 minutes from Riverton. The specialist did not soften the diagnosis. Colin's diffuse, large B-cell lymphoma had returned. The earlier treatment was no longer enough. The recommended path was salvage therapy followed, if his disease responded, by CAR-T treatment using modified immune cells. "How long can we think about it?" Colin asked. The doctor folded her hands. "You can seek another opinion. You should not create an avoidable delay." Colin looked at me. That look was familiar. It meant the problem had become real, and he trusted me to find the part we could control. I opened a new section in the blue binder. 3 days later, the insurer denied authorization for the full treatment path. The center was outside the network designated for part of Colin's care, and the most expensive stages would require an external medical necessity appeal. The hospital's financial counselor explained that the appeal could take weeks. Colin's cancer would not agree to that schedule. Treatment could begin only if we accepted the financial responsibility while the review continued. She turned her monitor toward us. That was the first time I saw what keeping Colin alive might cost. Before the counselor turned the screen toward us, money had rarely been the language Colin and I used for love. We divided bills according to income and argued occasionally about purchases, but we had never treated the house as a private advantage I could hold over him. When Bellcraft needed Colin at a dinner, I rearranged pickup. When my department closed its books, he handled bedtime. The balance was imperfect, but it felt alive rather than calculated. The house accumulated that history. Colin scratched the dining room floor, dragging a cabinet. He insisted he could move alone. Lacey lost her first tooth beside the back steps. Theo once filled the downstairs vent with cereal because he believed the furnace would distribute breakfast. We complained about repairs and joked that every improvement revealed two older problems. Jocelyn spent enough time there to have her own mug. She never arrived empty-handed during the first cancer treatment, but she also never made help look generous. She replaced groceries, checked a bill, or took the children to the park. Colin thanked her casually, as if competence circulated naturally among the women around him. Douglas helped differently. He paid for a private hospital room once when one became available and told everyone at Belcraft that Colin would defeat cancer. His confidence comforted Colin. It also left no language for fear. When Colin admitted uncertainty, Douglas answered with a plan. When Colin admitted pain, Douglas reminded him what the family expected from a Bell. I had mistaken that pressure for strength because it produced visible success. After the first remission, Colin returned to work quickly and earned his largest client within 6 months. Douglas told the story for years. His son left chemotherapy and went back to winning. The story rarely included the infections, physical therapy, or nights Colin woke, convinced the disease had returned. It did not include the blue binder. By the time of the relapse, Colin already knew what being sick cost him inside his family. He also knew I would stand close enough to see the cost. On the drive home from the specialist, he did not speak for almost an hour. Near Riverton, he asked whether I thought the children understood what relapse meant. Not yet. Do not tell them everything. I will tell them what they need to know. I do not want them looking at me like I am dying. Then we give them facts, not promises. He reached across the console and took my hand. That gesture stayed with me after the divorce because it proved he had once trusted the way I carried truth. When the denial arrived, I called the insurer from my desk at work. The representative read language about network adequacy and authorization levels. I wrote every word, requested a reference number, and asked for the external review deadline. None of those actions changed the fact that the cancer center had a treatment window and the insurer had a process. The two clocks did not care about each other. At home, we told Lacey and Theo the cancer had returned after dinner because I wanted them fed before fear changed the room. Colin sat beside me at the table. He explained that the doctors had another treatment. I explained that it would take time and that their routines might change. Is it the same cancer? Lacey asked. Yes, Colin said. Then why didn't the first medicine kill it? There are questions adults can answer medically and still fail to answer emotionally. I said cancer cells sometimes survive treatment and that the new doctors had a different plan. She studied both our faces, searching for the part we had left out. Theo asked whether Colin would lose his hair again. Maybe, Colin said, but it grows back. Theo accepted that because hair was something he understood. After they went upstairs, Colin stood at the sink with both palms flat on the counter. They looked at me differently. They are scared. I don't want fear to be the only thing they see. I moved beside him close enough that our shoulders touched. Then we give them other things to see too. At that moment, I meant ordinary dinners, school mornings, and Sunday pancakes. I did not know Colin would later hear the same promise as a demand to erase every witness to his weakness. The number on the counselor's screen was not one bill. It was a projection assembled from deposits, out-of-network treatment, specialist fees, temporary lodging, travel, and the care Colin would need while the appeal was pending. $320,000. I wrote it at the top of a legal pad and started subtracting what we had. Our emergency savings covered only a fraction. Colin's disability income would keep basic bills moving but could not touch the medical exposure. Belcraft was a valuable family company, but Colin's ownership interest was not cash he could withdraw on demand, and Douglas offered help in the form he always preferred: access, advice, and confidence, rather than enough money to solve the problem. The appeal could succeed, Colin said in the parking garage, It could. Then this is temporary. I looked at the amount again. The hospital needs commitments before temporary is over. We spent that night at the kitchen table. Lacey and Theo were asleep upstairs. Colin listed people who might lend us money. I called banks. We considered a loan against the house, but the amount available and the timing did not meet the treatment schedule. By sunrise, the arithmetic had become brutally simple. The largest thing I owned was the house. We did not decide in one noble sentence. We circled the number until 2 a.m. Colin suggested asking Douglas to advance money against his eventual ownership interest. Douglas offered to speak with the hospital and said the family would find a path, but he would not expose Belcraft's cash or personally guarantee the amount on the schedule we needed. The company employs 83 people, he said on speakerphone. I cannot endanger payroll because an insurer is slow. He was not entirely wrong. That made his refusal harder to hate and no easier to survive. Jocelyn sent a list of possible bridge loans and warned us about interest. The best option would still arrive too late. I called our mortgage lender and learned how slowly equity becomes available when urgency belongs only to the borrower. At 3:17, Colin said, "We do not have to sell your house." He emphasized your as if legal title could excuse him from the decision. If we wait and the disease advances, what exactly am I preserving it for? He covered his face. I went around the table and held him. Neither of us said he would have done the same for me. At the time, I did not need the sentence. I thought marriage was the sentence. The first thing I sold was the SUV. It was paid off and worth $31,000. I had used it for school pickups, grocery runs, and every appointment at the cancer center. The buyer drove it away on a Thursday. On Friday morning, I took 2 buses to work, then borrowed a coworker's car to collect Colin from testing. He sat quietly while I explained the new transportation plan. You shouldn't have to do this, he said. Neither should you. That answer satisfied both of us at the time. The jeweler offered $12,500 for my ring set. I had expected the sale to feel dramatic. It was administrative. He verified the stones, weighed the metal, printed a receipt, and asked whether I wanted the payment by check or transfer. I chose transfer because the hospital deadline was the following morning. Colin watched me remove the rings before we entered. We can replace them later, he said. I believed he meant we. Our remaining $34,500 came from emergency savings, a retirement withdrawal, and the last credit we could use without destroying our ability to pay ordinary bills. Those funds, the car, and the rings bought enough time to begin salvage treatment while the house went on the market. Telling the children was harder than signing anything. Are we moving because Dad is sick? Lacey asked. We're moving because the treatment costs more than insurance has agreed to pay right now. She was 12 only later when the custody case began. Then she was 11, already listening for what adults avoided saying. Theo wanted to know whether the new owners would keep the height marks inside the pantry door. They might paint over them, I said. He pressed his palm against the latest line with his name beside it. Then how will they know how tall I was? I took a photograph. It felt inadequate because it was. The house attracted an offer quickly. After paying the remaining mortgage and closing costs, we expected $242,000 in net proceeds. Added to the $31,000 vehicle sale, $12,500 ring sale, and $34,500 from everything else, the total was exactly $320,000. Our real estate agent brought the offer to the cancer center cafeteria. Colin was upstairs receiving fluids. The buyers wanted a fast inspection and had waived several minor repairs, but their closing date fell after the hospital's next deadline. I negotiated from a plastic chair beneath a television playing a cooking show. We agreed to a larger earnest deposit and sent the hospital proof of contract. I signed the offer electronically while a pager vibrated against my palm. When I returned to Colin's room, he was sleeping. I sat beside him and watched the clear line drip into his arm. I wanted him awake enough to understand what I had just done. I also wanted to protect him from having to understand it. That contradiction followed every sacrifice. I needed Colin to survive, and I needed the man who survived to remember the price without being crushed by it. I believed love would solve the difference. The closing would take time. The hospital accepted binding payment arrangements because the property was under contract and early funds were already available. Colin began salvage treatment. For the next several months, my life narrowed to a route between work, school, temporary lodging, and the cancer center. I reduced my schedule at Riverton Mechanical Supply to part-time. My manager, a woman who had cared for her own husband after a stroke, kept a place for me without pretending she could preserve my supervisory hours forever. The blue binder became too thick to close. I added infusion calendars, lab results, denial letters, parking receipts, lodging confirmations, and notes from conversations with the insurer. I kept a medication chart on my phone and a paper copy inside the binder because batteries fail. Colin's treatment was not a montage of brave smiles. Some days he could walk the corridor and joke with nurses. Other days, he vomited until there was nothing left and apologized because I had to clean the basin. Once, after fever sent us back to the hospital, he gripped my wrist and said he did not want to die in a room where the windows did not open. "You're not dying tonight," I told him. I did not know whether it was true. He needed me to say it as if I did. There was still tenderness between us. I washed his hair when his arms were too weak. He asked about the children even when talking exhausted him. After one admission, he cried because Theo had stopped climbing onto his lap, afraid he might hurt him. The betrayal that came later did not make those moments imaginary. It made them belong to a man I could no longer reconcile with the person he became. Lacey learned to pack Theo's lunch. She did it without being asked and told me only after I praised the neat rows in his container. Theo stopped requesting bedtime stories on nights when I returned late. If I offered, he said he was not tired, then fell asleep with the light on. Sunday pancakes survived unevenly. Sometimes Jocelyn came and stood at the stove. Sometimes I mixed batter at night and left instructions for Lacey. Colin asked for photographs from his hospital bed. The ritual became proof that our family could bend without breaking. I did not see that Lacey was learning a different lesson. When the family was afraid, the safest thing a child could do was become easier. The salvage treatment reduced Colin's disease enough for CART. His cells were collected and sent for modification. While we waited, he received bridging treatment to keep the lymphoma under control. The process was medically complicated and financially simple in the cruelest way. If the necessary commitments were not honored, his schedule could be disrupted. The money we had assembled made it possible to proceed while the insurer's external review continued. On the morning his cells were reinfused, the bag looked too small to contain the future we had purchased. A nurse verified Colin's name and date of birth. Another read numbers from the label. The room smelled briefly of canned corn, a harmless side effect the staff had warned us about. Colin looked at the bag, then at me. "All that for this? All that for what it can do." He reached for my ring hand and found bare skin. His thumb stopped where the band had been. "I am sorry." "Come home," I said. "Be sorry later." It was the closest either of us came to naming the bargain while we still believed we would share its aftermath. CAR-T began after the house was under contract, but before closing. Colin developed the expected fever and confusion. For one terrible night, he did not know what month it was. A nurse asked him to name our children, and he said Lacey twice. I stood at the foot of his bed, holding the binder against my chest, convinced I had traded our entire past for a future that might still refuse us. Then his condition stabilized. His counts began moving in the right direction. The first response assessment showed the treatment was working. We did not celebrate loudly. We had learned not to trust one good test, but Colin ate half a sandwich, asked for his laptop, and talked about returning to Belcraft. I walked to the parking structure and cried from relief where he could not see me. The house closing was 12 days away. The appeal, as far as I knew, was still unresolved. I believed the hardest decision had already been made. During the treatment months, there were dozens of smaller decisions that never appeared in Colin's later filings. I chose which bill could be paid late without interrupting service. I learned which hospital garage allowed overnight validation. I kept spare clothes for both children in the car until the car was sold, then carried them in a backpack on the bus. I answered work email from infusion chairs and school email from hospital corridors. Colin saw much of that. At first, he thanked me. After a difficult salvage infusion, he asked me to sit on the edge of his bed because he could not sleep while I was across the room. He told me the ceiling tiles looked like doors and that every time he closed his eyes, he imagined choosing the wrong one. "There is no choice tonight," I said. "You rest. I watch." He nodded. Months later, he would describe my watching as control. The appeal required physician letters, pathology, prior treatment history, and proof that the recommended center offered a medically necessary option unavailable within the insurer's preferred route. I assembled the administrative pieces while the oncology team supplied medicine. Each time the insurer requested something already submitted, I sent it again and added the date to the binder. The financial counselor never promised reimbursement. She explained that even a successful appeal might leave costs outside coverage. That uncertainty was why I used the full $320,000 estimate rather than assuming money would return. The house sale became public before we were ready. A sign appeared on the lawn. Neighbors brought casseroles and asked whether we were moving closer to Douglas. I said we needed flexibility during treatment. I did not say the place itself had become part of the medicine. Lacey began photographing rooms. She captured the dent in the stair rail, the cracked blue tile behind the stove, and the pencil marks inside the pantry. Theo hid one of his toy cars beneath a loose floorboard in the smallest bedroom because he wanted something of his to remain. I found it while packing and put it in his suitcase without telling him. Years later, he would discover it and insist the house had returned it. On closing week, I made one last Sunday breakfast in that kitchen. Colin was still near the cancer center, so he joined by video. His face looked thin on the screen. Lacey burned the first batch and began crying harder than burned pancakes deserved. "We can make more," I told her. "That is not the same." She was right. I had spent months promising the children that change did not mean disappearance. The sale proved some changes were permanent. CAR-T brought different fears. The medical team taught me warning signs and made clear that confusion or fever required immediate attention. For days, I studied Colin's face for changes while pretending not to. When he forgot the month, my first feeling was terror. My second was guilt that part of me calculated whether the insurer would count the added care. Caregiving made room for thoughts I was ashamed to admit. I resented people who complained about parking. I envied families whose largest problem was an argument. I sometimes stood in the hospital bathroom and wished someone else could be the person who knew every answer. Then I washed my face and returned. That pattern was the center of who I had become: need, shame, function. When Colin stabilized, a nurse told me I could sleep. I did not know how. I sat beside the window with the binder and watched the city lights until morning. The next day, he asked for his laptop, and I took it as evidence our future had restarted. I did not yet understand that surviving a crisis does not return people to the beliefs they carried into it. Sometimes it exposes the beliefs underneath. Colin's strength returned in increments. First, he could shower without sitting down. Then he began walking the cancer center corridor without holding the rail. His appetite came back in sudden, specific demands: tomato soup, then steak, then the cinnamon rolls from a bakery near Belcraft. I welcomed every sign. What I did not welcome was the way concern began to irritate him. "Did you take the antiviral?" I asked one morning. "I know what I'm taking." "I'm checking because the schedule changed." "Maren, I can read a label." The sharpness surprised me. He apologized later, and I blamed the months in which strangers had measured his urine and asked him to rate every pain. Recovery had to include the right to stop feeling watched, so I asked fewer questions aloud and kept tracking privately. Belcraft invited him to a client meeting before his doctors had cleared full-time work. Douglas framed it as a sign that the company needed him. Colin returned with color in his face and stories about people who had stood when he entered the conference room. At home, recovery looked less ceremonial. Colin tired halfway through unloading the dishwasher and snapped when I took a plate from his hand. He could deliver a 40-minute presentation, then sleep for 3 hours. The children learned that applause at work did not mean they could climb on him without warning. I tried to make those adjustments invisible. I moved heavy laundry before he saw it. I kept the thermometer in a drawer instead of on the counter. When friends asked how he was doing, I said stronger, unless he supplied another answer. One evening, Lacey asked why everyone at Bellcraft had given Colin a cake for returning, but nobody gave me one for taking care of him. Because I did not go anywhere, I said. Colin was close enough to hear. For a second, shame crossed his face. Then he told Lacey that families did not keep score. I agreed. That was the rule that allowed him not to look. Serena Pike was consulting on Bellcraft's brand and client experience. Colin mentioned her first as the woman who had redesigned the presentation he used, then as the person who persuaded Douglas that Colin's recovery could become part of the company's story. She knew the version of him who walked back into a room after cancer. She did not know the man who had needed help standing beside a hospital bed. Serena's campaign placed Colin at the center of Bellcraft's new materials. The photographs showed him beside machinery in a fitted jacket, one hand resting on a steel table. The accompanying profile described resilience, reinvention, and leadership. It mentioned doctors and family support in one sentence, then devoted 5 paragraphs to Colin's determination. He brought the proof home and asked what I thought. "You look healthy," I said. "That is the point. The story makes it sound like you decided to recover." His expression closed. "Can you let one good thing be good?" I apologized. Later, I reread the piece and tried to feel proud. What troubled me was not that it simplified treatment. Every public story simplifies. It was that Colin seemed relieved to enter a version of his life where effort flowed in only one direction, from him toward survival, and everything supplied by others became background. I met her briefly at a Bellcraft reception. She was polished, attentive, and careful not to stare at Colin's still short hair. She told him he looked stronger than the photographs Douglas had shown. "I feel stronger," Colin said. He did not introduce me as the person who had carried the camera. That omission was too small to accuse and too sharp to forget. Around then, Colin asked to manage his own medical portal again. I was relieved. Independence had been the goal. I gave him the login information, removed my email from routine alerts at his request, and kept access only where the hospital still required a guarantor contact. 5 days before the house closing, the external appeal was approved. I know the exact timing now because the insurer's records later showed the notice entered Colin's portal at 8:14 on a Monday morning. He opened it 11 minutes later. The decision approved reimbursement of $214,000 for payments and obligations already connected to the authorized treatment. It was the kind of notice I had checked for every day until Colin took over the portal. He did not tell me. He changed the correspondence address to Bellcraft and supplied payment instructions for an account I did not know existed. That Monday afternoon, he called to remind me to bring identification to the closing. Jocelyn saw a business-routed copy of the approval the following day. Bellcraft had assisted with insurance administration during Colin's disability, and the redirected correspondence reached a channel her office monitored. She asked Colin why it was going there. He told her the hospital still had to reconcile the treatment and that he would explain everything to me after the final scan. He said changing the closing would create fees, disrupt our temporary arrangements, and complicate care. Jocelyn knew enough to question him. She knew enough to call me. She did neither. At the hotel, months later, she would say she told herself she was protecting the company from confusion and giving her brother time to disclose his own medical finances. The truth was simpler. Colin had spent their childhood making bold choices. Douglas had praised the result, and Jocelyn had been expected to manage whatever came after. Challenging him before he acted felt more dangerous to her than repairing damage afterward. Her silence cost me the house. Closing took 40 minutes. The buyers were a young couple expecting their first child. They talked about opening the kitchen wall and turning the smallest bedroom into a nursery. I signed where the closing agent pointed and tried not to imagine Theo's height marks beneath new paint. The net proceeds were $242,000, exactly as projected. They moved directly into the medical obligations and accounts we had established during treatment. Colin signed beside me, knowing $214,000 had already been approved for return. At the end, I placed the brass key on the table. The agent gave it to the buyers, then discovered they had their own set. Without thinking, I slipped the old one back into my bag. For weeks, it traveled with me, opening nothing. We moved into short-term housing near the cancer center. The children shared one room. Colin complained about the mattress and the lack of privacy, complaints I interpreted as evidence he expected to live. The reimbursement reached his undisclosed account after the closing. He preserved most of it. Some paid for an attorney consultation. Some supported the company vehicle and the transition he was already imagining. The records would later show transfers and withdrawals. At the time, I saw only that Colin stopped worrying aloud about money. "Douglas says the executive townhouse is available," he told me. "It's closer to school." I thought Belcraft was helping our family move home. Colin began spending longer days at work. Serena's name appeared in casual stories and then disappeared entirely, which was more noticeable. He bought new clothes because his old ones hung loosely. He joined a rehabilitation gym. When I asked whether he wanted me at an appointment, he said I made everything feel medical. "It is medical," I said. "You are still being monitored." "That is exactly what I mean." The distance between us developed without one clean argument. He stopped reaching for me in bed. He answered questions as though they were inspections. He praised Serena for understanding that survival was supposed to lead somewhere. He began leaving his phone face down. The first time I noticed, I felt ashamed for noticing. Suspicion seemed obscene beside remission. I had spent months begging for more life and did not want to become someone who objected to how he used it. We tried one dinner alone. Colin chose a new restaurant across town, the kind of place Serena had recommended for clients. He wore his blue suit. I wore a dress from before treatment and saw, in the mirror, how much weight I had lost. "We should talk about what comes next," I said after we ordered. "Exactly," he leaned forward. "I cannot go back to being managed. Medication reminders are not a system of government." "You hear yourself, don't you?" I asked whether he was angry with me. He said he was trying to discover who he was after nearly dying. That sounded reasonable enough to turn my hurt into another burden I should carry privately. Across the room, a server dropped a tray and every glass struck the floor at once. Colin flinched. I reached for his hand by instinct. He pulled it beneath the table. That was the moment I knew something between us was breaking. It was not the moment I understood he had already started building elsewhere. I thought he was angry at cancer. He was angry at the version of himself I remembered. His final response scan approached. He had the hidden reimbursement, access to a company vehicle, a return path at Belcraft, and the executive townhouse. I had part-time wages, no car, no house, and the binder containing proof of what had happened, but not what he planned to do with it. The scan would tell us whether Colin's body had escaped cancer. Recovery changed the way other people treated Colin before it changed the way his body felt. At Belcraft, employees lowered their voices when asking about illness, then applauded his first completed presentation. Clients called him inspiring. Douglas arranged a welcome lunch and introduced him as proof that bells did not remain down. Colin returned from those days energized and exhausted. He wanted stories from work, not questions about symptoms. He wanted clothing that fit and meals that did not smell like the hospital. I tried to follow his lead, but I knew his next lab date, the medication requiring food, and the number to call if his temperature rose. My knowledge existed even when I kept it silent. Colin could feel it. "You are waiting for something to go wrong," he said. "I am trying to make sure it does not." That is not the same as living. I wanted to tell him my ability to live had been converted into his treatment. Instead, I apologized for hovering. Serena offered different attention. She asked what he wanted to build next. She photographed him under good lighting for Bellcraft materials and removed the evidence of fatigue. She called his return a second beginning. The phrase appealed to him because second beginnings do not have to acknowledge the first life's debts. Jocelyn noticed changes at work. Colin requested direct control over benefits correspondence and asked that documents come to the office. Each request could be explained by privacy. Together, they formed a wall I could not see. When approval arrived, Colin had hours before Jocelyn learned. He could have called me, paused the instructions, or told the closing agent our position had changed. Instead, he printed the decision and closed his office door. Records later showed he opened the account that afternoon. That sequence mattered more than any argument about entitlement. Emotion can be complicated. Opening an account requires identification, fields, and confirmation. It offers several chances to stop. Jocelyn's silence contained chances too. She drafted an email asking whether Colin had spoken to me about the appeal and did not send it. The audit later recovered the auto-saved version. She had protected hierarchy, not health. The last evening in the house, I walked through each room alone. I removed a nail from the kitchen wall and filled the hole with white paste. It was absurd to repair a wall for strangers while my marriage split beyond my view, but that repair had an answer. The hole was there, then it was closed. Colin called and asked whether I had packed his blue suit. He had already selected the clothes he would wear to meet his divorce attorney. I folded the suit into a garment bag. Long before that appointment, he had begun arranging to escape me. The $214,000 was not merely money Colin kept from me. It was the foundation of the stability he later claimed I lacked. He used Bellcraft's vehicle as though it were personal property. He secured the executive townhouse through Douglas. He consulted a divorce attorney while telling me he was staying late for the work he had missed. His relationship with Serena crossed from admiration into an affair during those months. I learned the chronology later from messages obtained in discovery. Colin told her our marriage had ended emotionally during treatment. He described me as a woman who needed him sick because caregiving gave me control. He said he had stayed to protect the children while recovering enough to leave safely. Serena knew he was married. She chose to believe the version that made her participation temporary and compassionate. She was not the architect of what Colin did, but she accepted his conclusions without asking what my life looked like beyond them. In his messages, she represented freedom. I represented the hospital. He began preparing the custody case before the remission appointment. For that, money was not enough. He needed a story. He also needed timing. His attorney advised him that an established school routine, ready bedrooms, and immediate possession could shape the first temporary decision. Colin began asking casual questions about when the medical apartment ended and whether my manager expected me back full-time. He suggested I visit my friend across the state line to rest, and later treated the possibility as evidence that I planned to relocate. He photographed the temporary apartment on a day when treatment supplies covered the dining table. He saved a bank notice showing my credit balance after the duplex application, though he did not include the medical charges that created it. He asked the school office to add the Bellcraft townhouse address as an emergency contact location before he told me we would live separately. Each act was small enough to explain. Together, they created a future in which his preparation looked like character and my exhaustion looked like danger. He chose facts that were true and removed the reason each fact existed. I worked part-time. I did not own a vehicle. I had no permanent address after the medical apartment ended. I had cried during an argument. During the worst week of his treatment, I had sent a friend a message saying, "I cannot keep doing this." The full conversation made clear that this meant managing a denied appeal, hospital deadlines, work, children, and 3 nights without sleep. Collins submitted the sentence without the surrounding messages. I had also considered staying briefly with that friend who lived across the state line if our local housing ended before we found another place. Colin presented the possibility as a plan to remove the children from Riverton. Douglas provided a statement confirming Colin had stable employment, a company vehicle, and access to the townhouse. I do not believe Douglas understood every allegation Colin attached to it. I do believe he was willing not to ask. Colin wanted stronger income documentation. He asked Jocelyn to classify a non-recurring company advance as ordinary compensation and prepare a letter that made his benefits appear permanently guaranteed. She refused. "I can confirm your salary," she told him. "I cannot turn an advance into salary. You are making this harder than it needs to be. The records are what they are. Maren has been talking to you. Maren does not know you asked." That conversation broke something between them. Jocelyn preserved the draft, but she still did not warn me. She had moved from silence to refusal, not yet to courage. Colin filed 9 days before the specialist confirmed remission. The morning he filed, he kissed Theo's forehead before school and reminded Lacey about a science assignment. He texted me that he would be late because Douglas had scheduled a meeting. The filing entered the court system at 10:42 a.m. At 11:16, Colin messaged Serena that the first protection was in place. At 3:05, he collected the children. Those times later appeared in separate records. Placed together, they removed the last possibility that panic had driven him to act without planning. The temporary order was issued on the strength of allegations that I might remove the children and could not provide stable care. It was designed for quick review, not permanent judgment. But Colin understood that possession creates its own appearance. He collected Lacey and Theo from school before telling me. Lacey contacted Jocelyn from her tablet that night. She said Colin would not let her make a second call, and Theo believed I had chosen to leave. That message finally made Jocelyn understand that protecting Belcraft and protecting Colin were no longer neutral choices. Her silence had entered the children's lives. That was what brought her to my hotel. The chronology had reached the door you already saw me open. I did not need to relive the knock to remember what followed. Jocelyn stepped inside, placed the envelope on the laminate desk, and showed me the approval date, 5 days before closing. She showed me a copy of the remittance notice for $214,000 and the Belcraft address used for correspondence. She showed me Colin's request for the compensation letter and her refusal. She gave me the name of the bank appearing on a transfer reference, although she did not have authority to access the account itself. Then she told me about Lacey's message. "Why didn't you call me before I signed?" I asked. "I believed him when he said he would tell you. You balance accounts for a living. You did not believe a $214,000 approval could wait without changing the closing." She did not defend herself. "No," she said. "I was afraid of what would happen if I went against him and my father. I told myself waiting was different from helping. It wasn't. I know. I wanted to call Colin. I wanted to read the date aloud and hear his confidence fracture. My phone was already in my hand when I saw the cropped message attached to the custody filing. If I called him before preserving everything, I would give him time to change what he could." I put the phone down. That was the first decision I made after the betrayal that was not an attempt to make Colin understand me. I photographed every page Jocelyn brought. She kept the originals she was required to preserve at Belcraft. I exported the complete conversation containing my exhaustion message and sent copies to 2 secure locations. I scanned the house closing statement, vehicle sale, ring receipt, and treatment ledger from the blue binder. Jocelyn watched me work. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Find out what I can prove." Before sunrise, I created an index in the blue binder. I numbered each page instead of trusting emotion to remember where anything belonged. The opening spread held the court papers. Behind it came the full conversation Colin had cropped, then employment records, housing notices, treatment statements, and sale receipts. At the back, I placed a blank sheet titled Questions. The first question I wrote was not how could he? It was who can authenticate the approval. The second was Where did the reimbursement go? The third was, when can I see Lacey and Theo? Grief kept trying to change their order. I kept changing it back. My employer offered a legal benefit program I had ignored for years. At 8 the next morning, it connected me to Anika Shah, a family law attorney who agreed to review the temporary order and accept a reduced initial retainer. Anika listened without interrupting. When I finished, she separated the issues into 2 columns on a yellow pad. What happened to you morally and what we can establish legally will overlap, she said. They will not be identical. He lied. Then we authenticate the truth. But our first objective is not the reimbursement. It is contact with your children and correction of any claim that you present an immediate risk. Can we get them back today? I cannot promise that. I can ask for expedited review. I can show the court what the filing omitted. And you can build a plan that does not depend on the judge believing Colin is a terrible person. That last sentence hurt because part of me wanted an authority to name him exactly as I now saw him. Anika asked whether I had somewhere appropriate for the children to sleep, reliable transportation, and a work plan. I looked around the hotel room. Not yet, I said. Then today is not about proving you had stability yesterday. It is about creating a credible plan now. She helped me distinguish urgency from panic. A school district lease mattered more than matching Colin's furnishings. A letter from my manager mattered more than promising I could work any schedule. A transportation plan could include a borrowed car, public transit, and backup contacts. It did not have to begin with ownership. Courts see people after fires, evictions, illnesses, and sudden separations, she said. Having lost property is not the same as having lost capacity. I wrote that sentence beneath my questions. Anika also told me not to empty my last credit line on objects selected for photographs. Beds, basic food, school access, safety. The children needed a functioning home, not a staged rebuttal. That advice embarrassed me because I had already pictured buying matching bedroom sets I could not afford. Colin's comparison had entered my judgment before the hearing began. Truth had opened the case. The next day, Colin accused me of involving Jocelyn in a private medical matter. I did not answer the accusation. I answered only the proposed time for speaking to the children. That change infuriated him. For 14 years, Colin could create an emotional question and trust me to resolve it. If he called me controlling, I explained. If he called me cold, I produced warmth. If he said I misunderstood, I returned with context. Refusing his argument removed a tool neither of us had recognized as power. Anika asked for a chronology based only on documents. No motives, no adjectives, denial, sale, treatment, approval, closing, reimbursement, attorney consultation, filing. The pattern was stronger without my anger. Jocelyn's statement was equally restrained. She saw approval, questioned Colin, received his request concerning compensation, and refused it. She did not claim to witness the account opening or know his attorney's advice. Her refusal to exaggerate made the facts more useful. Douglas called before the hearing. This can still be handled within the family. Colin filed in court. Dragging Bellcraft into this could hurt innocent employees. Bellcraft provided the home, vehicle, and income picture he used. I did not drag it anywhere. Douglas went silent. I had spent years making disagreement comfortable for him. I let the silence remain his. School portals showed I handled forms and conferences. Pediatric records listed me as consistent contact. The documents did not prove love. They proved Colin's description of sudden incapacity was incomplete. Without the children, I still woke at 6 for school mornings. I packed a lunch once from habit, then stood holding it in the hotel kitchenette. Legal work gave those hours shape. It did not remove the pain. When the duplex manager asked why I needed 2 bedrooms immediately, I said my children would be staying under a temporary schedule. I did not say I was trying to build a home before a magistrate decided whether I deserved time inside it. The deposit cleared. My available credit dropped almost to 0. I signed anyway. This signature did not erase security for someone else. It created a small peace for me. Before Jocelyn left the hotel, she asked whether I wanted her to stay. No. At the door, I stopped her. If Lacey contacts you, do not ask her to carry information. I won't. Do not tell Colin what I am doing. I won't. That was the beginning of our new relationship. Not trust restored, but boundaries stated and followed. It would not furnish a bedroom. For the next 5 days, I built the most ordinary plan of my life as if it were an emergency response. My manager restored me to full-time hours sooner than expected and documented that my supervisory position remained available. A friend from work lent me her older sedan for the hearing week. I applied for a 2-bedroom duplex inside the children's school district and paid the deposit with the last of my available credit. Accepting help embarrassed me more than selling the ring had. The ring had felt like sacrifice. Borrowing a car felt like failure. Annika corrected me. A temporary resource is still a resource, she said. Do not adopt his definition of stability. The duplex manager allowed me to collect the keys before the unit was fully cleaned. I carried in 2 air mattresses, sheets, 4 towels, and groceries bought according to what children might eat when they did not know whether they were visiting or returning. My coworker Nadia brought a folding table and refused the gas money I offered. You covered my quarter end close when my mother was in hospice, she said. This is not charity. This is the part where people remember. I had remembered help as a ledger entry because that was the only way I knew to receive it without feeling exposed. Nadia placed the car keys on the counter and left before I could turn gratitude into an argument. My manager's letter described my position, salary, insurance eligibility, and approved schedule. It did not pretend I had worked full-time during Colin's treatment. It explained that the reduction was temporary caregiving leave and that my performance remained strong. The truth contained its own stability once someone stopped cutting away the cause. I called the school counselor and arranged for the bus route to include the duplex if the schedule changed. I mapped the walk from the front door to the stop. I tested the borrowed car twice. I listed Nadia and my manager as emergency backups only after asking them. By midnight, the 2 bedrooms held mattresses and lamps. Nothing matched. Everything functioned. We authenticated the full message Colin had cropped. My friend retained the same conversation on her phone. The lines before my statement discussed the insurer's refusal to return a call. The lines after it described the hospital deposit and my need for 3 hours of sleep. Annika attached the treatment schedule, sale documents, employment letter, school records, and proposed housing plan. She did not attach every painful photograph from Colin's illness. His vulnerability was not evidence that I should parent the children. At the expedited review, Colin sat beside his attorney wearing the dark suit he used for major Bellcraft presentations. He looked composed. I looked tired because I was. That difference frightened me until the magistrate began asking dates. Annika had warned me that an expedited review would not become a trial about our whole marriage. The court needed to know whether emergency restrictions were still necessary. I repeated that to myself whenever Colin's affidavit made me want to answer 14 years in one breath. His attorney showed photographs of the townhouse bedrooms. She emphasized their distance from school and the company vehicle parked outside. Annika did not argue that the rooms were too attractive. She asked who owned the townhouse, whether Colin paid market rent, and when Bellcraft granted access. The answers placed each photograph back inside its timeline. Then she showed my lease, employment confirmation, transportation plan, and the uncropped message. The documents were plain. Their power came from refusing Colin's frame. When did I reduce work? During treatment? Why was the house sold? To meet medical obligations under active denial. Why had I mentioned leaving the state? Because temporary medical housing was ending and a friend offered a room, not because I intended to hide the children. When was the full message written? During an admission when I had not slept for 3 nights. Colin argued that intentions did not create a home and that the children needed predictability after cancer. That part was true. The question was whether he had the right to define predictability as possession of resources he had concealed. The magistrate did not decide our marriage or the money that day. She decided the emergency allegations did not justify Colin's unilateral control, while material facts remained disputed. Colin's face barely changed when she said immediate contact. Only the muscle beside his jaw moved. I knew that signal from negotiations at the kitchen table. He was already deciding how to turn a partial loss into proof that he remained reasonable. Outside the courtroom, he approached as if we were colleagues leaving a difficult meeting. "We need to make this easier on the kids," he said. "Then follow the order and do not discuss the case with them." "You think a piece of paper makes you stable?" Annika touched my elbow before I answered. The old version of me would have listed everything I had done to become stable. The new version kept walking. She prohibited either parent from relocating the children, ordered immediate contact, established an interim shared schedule, and appointed a custody evaluator. Lacey and Theo would begin child-focused counseling. Adult litigation was not to be discussed with them. It was not a total reversal. It was enough for me to see my children the following afternoon. The duplex approval came through that morning. It smelled faintly of paint and had one bedroom larger than the other. I gave Lacey the larger room because she needed a door she could close. Theo chose the room facing the alley because a security light made it less dark. When they arrived, Theo ran into me, then stopped as though he had broken a rule. Lacey hugged me carefully. "Is this where we live now?" she asked. "It is one of your homes." I made grilled cheese because I did not have pancake mix. They inspected the rooms, the borrowed car, and the stack of boxes Jocelyn had delivered from storage. Neither asked about the divorce papers. I did not ask what Colin had told them. The first hour felt like an audition none of us had agreed to. Theo asked where the fire extinguisher was. Lacey checked whether the bathroom door locked. When I opened a box and discovered I had packed 3 serving bowls but no can opener, she watched to see whether I would fall apart. "We can buy one tomorrow," I said. "Dad's place already has everything." "I'm glad you have what you need there." She frowned, almost disappointed. Colin's version of me required jealousy. My refusal to supply it gave her nowhere familiar to place the tension. After dinner, Theo asked to call him. I handed over my phone and went into the bedroom far enough to give privacy, close enough to hear Theo say, "Mom has smoke alarms." Colin asked him to count them. I wanted to take the phone. Instead, I let the call end and said, "You never have to report that you are safe here. If something worries you, you can always tell either of us." Theo nodded without looking convinced. At bedtime, Lacey refused the air mattress in her room and slept on the floor beside Theo's. I lay awake, listening to their whispers through the wall. I had my children under my roof. Gratitude did not cancel the knowledge that they were afraid to settle. That restraint lasted until Theo found the brass key in a kitchen drawer. "Is this for our old house?" It was. "Dad said you sold it because you could not take care of us anymore." Lacey became completely still. I wanted to correct every word. Instead, I sat on the floor so Theo did not have to look up at me. "I sold the house to help pay for Dad's treatment. Adults made that decision. You did not cause it, and it did not mean I stopped wanting our family." "Then why can't we go back?" "Because another family owns it now." He began crying with the silent seriousness children use when they have postponed it too long. Lacey led him to the sofa and handed him a tissue. She had been doing that kind of thing for more than a year. "You do not have to fix this for him," I told her. "Someone does." The words exposed what no order could repair. Lacey believed the adults were too damaged to carry Theo's fear, so she carried it herself. The next morning, I found her making his breakfast before I entered the kitchen. "You can sleep," I told her. "He likes the crust cut off." "I know." Dad forgets. I took the knife gently from her hand. Then Dad can learn, and I can remember. Neither one is your job. She crossed her arms. You say that now. The sentence carried more history than accusation. During treatment, I had thanked her for helping because I needed the help. I had called her mature when she silenced her own needs. Colin was not the only parent who benefited from her becoming smaller. You're right, I said. I asked too much before. I'm going to work on that. She looked at me with the suspicion children reserve for apologies that might require them to comfort the adult. I cut the crusts. I did not ask her to forgive me. Our first shared week was full of small tests. Theo called Colin to confirm he was allowed to enjoy dinner. Lacey watched my face when his name appeared. I told both children they could love their father and tell the truth at the same time. I repeated it until I began believing it for myself. The interim schedule divided days in a way that looked simple on paper and consumed our lives in practice. Each child needed school clothes, medications, chargers, and comfort objects in both homes. I could not afford duplicates of everything, so I created a transfer checklist and taped it inside the coat closet. On the second exchange, Theo's inhaler remained in Colin's kitchen. Colin offered to drive it over, then used the doorway to argue that my lack of a second prescription proved poor planning. Give me the inhaler, I said. He held it for 1 extra second before releasing it. The next day, I asked the pediatrician for separate labeled supplies where medically appropriate. I stopped allowing preventable objects to become reasons Colin needed access to my home. Counseling began on Thursday afternoons. The therapist met with Colin and me separately before seeing the children. She asked what outcome I wanted. I want them to stop believing they have to keep either parent emotionally safe. Including you? The honest answer caught in my throat. Including me. Colin followed the schedule, but he treated every exchange as a presentation. The company SUV gleamed. The townhouse had furnished bedrooms and framed photographs already placed on shelves. He did not need to say my duplex was temporary. The comparison said it for him. I stopped competing with the furniture. I worked. I paid rent. I left the hall light on for Theo. I knocked before entering Lacey's room. When Sunday came, I made pancakes too thin and let the children complain. Returning to full-time work required its own humility. My department had developed systems without me. A younger analyst named Priya had taken over a vendor reconciliation I once considered mine. My first impulse was to reclaim every task and prove absence had not made me replaceable. Then I recognized Colin's fear inside the impulse. I asked Priya to show me what she had changed. Her process was better. We kept it. That small decision loosened something. Competence did not require being indispensable. Other people could carry weight without erasing me. At home, we created routines that did not ask the children to admire them. Shoes went in a plastic tray. School notices went on the refrigerator. Friday dinner came from the least expensive pizza place in walking distance. Theo chose a chipped green cup and declared it his. Lacey taped one photograph from the old house inside her closet where she could see it without explaining it. One Sunday, she asked whether Serena would be at Colin's townhouse during their next visit. I don't know. Would it make you mad if I liked her? Every answer I wanted to give belonged to the divorce, not to my daughter. You are allowed to decide how you feel about anyone. You do not have to decide it for me. She searched my face for injury. I kept the injury mine. By the next exchange, Theo stopped inspecting the smoke alarms. He left a plastic dinosaur beneath his bed and found it in the same place when he returned. That was how the duplex began becoming real, not through what I bought, but through what the children trusted it to keep. The court had given me time with them. Consistency had to make that time feel safe. Meanwhile, Annika began asking systems for the truth Colin had kept inside the family. Jocelyn's envelope gave us directions. It did not give us conclusions. That distinction protected the case from becoming revenge, supported by stolen paper. Annika did not deposit Jocelyn's copies as if family access made them self-proving. She sent preservation notices, requested the insurer's native records, subpoenaed the bank, and sought Belcraft documents through defined categories. Every request required patience. Colin objected that his medical information was private. Annika narrowed what we sought to authorization, notice, routing, and payment, facts connected to marital assets and his sworn financial statements. The court entered protective terms for the remaining clinical material. I resented every day procedure consumed until Annika reminded me that evidence becomes durable by surviving challenge. "We do not need the most pages," she said. "We need the right record from the person who keeps it." So I stopped treating the blue binder as a verdict. It became a map. The insurer produced the approval record through formal discovery. The timestamp matched what Jocelyn had shown me. Colin opened the notice 5 days before closing. The payment instructions had been changed through his authenticated portal access. The production included an access log, call notes, and the electronic acknowledgement attached to the payment election. An insurer representative confirmed that no hospital employee had selected Colin's private account. The direction came from his authenticated session after the appeal decision was available. One call note recorded Colin asking whether the reimbursement description would identify the underlying treatment. Another reflected his request that paper confirmation go to Belcraft rather than our temporary housing. There was no dramatic confession in either call. There was something more useful, ordinary administrative language documenting deliberate choices. At deposition, Colin said he routed the funds separately because the hospital reconciliation remained incomplete. Annika placed the approval letter beside the hospital ledger showing the covered amounts. Then she asked why he had not disclosed either the account or the contingent claim on the financial affidavit supporting his temporary petition. He said his attorney had not asked the right question. The transcript preserved the pause before the answer. The bank produced the deposit, $214,000. The account had been opened in Colin's name alone. The first major withdrawals corresponded to his attorney retainer and expenses related to the townhouse transition. Most of the money remained traceable, but enough had moved to show this was not an administrative oversight. A financial specialist followed the transfers without pretending every dollar retained a label. She matched deposits and withdrawals by date, amount, source, and destination. The largest balance moved into a short-term account 2 days after receipt. Smaller payments covered the retainer, furniture, a security system for the townhouse, and a credit card balance containing charges from Colin's time with Serena. Annika did not ask the court to call every purchase theft. Some were ordinary living expenses during separation. The relevant questions were disclosure, preservation, and whether marital funds had been spent to prepare a unilateral exit while I carried the debts created by his care. The specialist calculated several outcomes under different legal assumptions. Even the narrowest left a substantial traceable balance. That range mattered. It showed we were not forcing arithmetic to express my anger. When I saw a charge for a restaurant Colin and Serena visited the night I packed his remaining medical supplies, I stared at it too long. Annika covered the line with her hand. "It proves timing," she said. "It cannot tell you why you were not enough, because that is not a true premise." I copied the date and left the meal where it belonged, in an exhibit, not in my worth. The hospital records confirmed the other half of the truth. Treatment had been urgent, the financial commitments had permitted it to proceed, and $106,000 remained genuinely unreimbursed after the appeal. I placed the numbers on one page. $214,000 returned, $106,000 consumed, $320,000 total. Seeing the equation balance did not make it fair. It made it undeniable. Belcraft's records told a parallel story. The townhouse was an executive benefit approved through Douglas. The vehicle belonged to the company. The advance Colin wanted, presented as salary, was non-recurring. His request to Jocelyn appeared in writing because she had answered it in writing. The townhouse authorization form described temporary executive housing needed for Colin's return from treatment. It did not mention separation or anticipated custody litigation. Douglas had signed it after Colin told him the medical apartment was unsuitable for the children. The vehicle log showed Colin received exclusive use 3 weeks before filing. Belcraft continued paying insurance, maintenance, and fuel. On paper, those benefits made Colin appear able to provide a home and transportation on his salary. In reality, the company supplied both after he had already begun planning the case. Douglas's deposition was painful because he did not consider himself dishonest. He believed Colin needed support after cancer. He believed Belcraft should help. He believed I had always found a way through difficulty and therefore would do so again. Did you ask how Mrs. Bell would transport the children after the family vehicle was sold? Annika asked. Maren is resourceful. Did you ask why the house had been sold? For treatment. Did you know about the reimbursement when you signed the housing letter? Douglas looked toward Colin's lawyer before answering. I knew an insurance matter was being resolved. The family system appeared in that answer. Colin received resources because he was recovering. I was denied them because everyone trusted me to endure. Serena's messages established when Colin began describing our marriage as over. He had told her I was unstable before he told me he wanted a divorce. He had discussed school schedules and the townhouse as parts of a future they might share. The messages did not begin with declarations. They began with presentation notes, jokes, and the intimacy of someone asking what Colin wanted instead of what medication he had taken. Then he disclosed selective pieces of our marriage. Serena answered with sympathy. Sympathy became secrecy, and secrecy became a plan. I did not read every message. Annika selected the ones tied to dates, money, housing, and the children. I had spent too much of my life monitoring Colin's body. I would not spend the next part monitoring every word of his affair. In her deposition, Serena admitted Colin had shown her photographs of the townhouse before he filed. He told her the children would likely stay with him because I was considering leaving Riverton. She had never seen the full message on which that claim depended. Did you ask to see it? Annika said. No. Why not? Serena looked down at her hands. Because I wanted him to be telling the truth. It was the first honest sentence I heard from her. When Serena received a subpoena, she stopped responding to Colin's private messages and hired her own lawyer. Her first statement was defensive. She believed what Colin told her. The records forced her to recognize that belief had been convenient. Colin answered evidence with a new story. He proposed settlement terms that would return part of the reimbursement if I agreed to equal school week placement immediately, confidentiality concerning Belcraft, and a statement that the temporary petition had been filed in good faith. Annika read the offer aloud once, then asked what I wanted to do. For a moment, money and access to the children occupied the same page exactly as Colin intended. Can he make custody consideration for the money? He can propose almost anything. We do not have to accept the premise. We countered on finances without trading away the children's assessment. Colin withdrew the offer. He also accused Jocelyn of violating company duties and demanded sanctions against me for using confidential medical correspondence. The protective order and formal authentication defeated most of that pressure, but responding consumed time and fees. Procedure was not a clean path toward truth. It was also a place where a person with resources could make truth expensive. I took extra reconciliation work from home after the children slept. Some nights the legal invoices felt like a second illness, one with no insurer to appeal. He said the reimbursement belonged to him because he was the patient. He said I had chosen to sell my property. He said tracking every dollar proved I had turned his survival into a debt he could never repay. I never asked him to repay being alive, I told Annika. Then do not argue with that sentence, she said. We are accounting for marital funds and disclosures. Colin called Jocelyn a traitor. Douglas accused her of risking jobs by drawing Belcraft into private litigation. The company entered the litigation when its resources were used to support the filing, she told him. For the first time, she did not repair the conversation after making him angry. Jocelyn moved the relevant company files into the audit hold, disclosed her own delay, and asked the board chair to remove her from decisions involving Colin's benefits. Each action reduced her control over the outcome. That was how I knew it was different from the careful disclosures she had once rationed. Douglas stopped inviting her to Sunday dinner. Colin sent messages reminding her of mistakes he had concealed when they were younger and favors he had done at work. Jocelyn forwarded anything relevant to counsel and did not answer the rest. Silence used to protect him, she told me once in the courthouse hallway. Now I am trying to make it mean he no longer gets an argument. Make sure it doesn't protect you either, I said. She nodded. Our conversations had become exact because comfort could too easily become collusion. Colin complied with the interim schedule, but the children began returning with phrases that sounded rehearsed. Lacey said, "Dad believes financial responsibility is an important factor in primary placement. No 12-year-old talks that way without help." Theo asked whether my lawyer was trying to take away Colin's treatment money. He began calling Colin during my parenting time to report that he was safe. The pressure appeared in smaller behaviors before either child could describe it. Lacey asked permission to keep a sweatshirt at my duplex because Colin had called clothing left there "one more thing your mother cannot provide." Theo packed snacks in both directions, even though food waited in each kitchen. At one exchange, the borrowed sedan would not start. Nadia arrived 23 minutes later with jumper cables. Colin stood beside the company SUV and recorded the delay on his phone. "This is the instability, I mean," he said while the children listened. Lacey looked at the ground. Theo began apologizing as if he had drained the battery. I wanted to point at the SUV and say its polished door was paid for by the company while my old vehicle had become medicine. Instead, I knelt beside Theo. "Cars have problems. Adults solve them. None of this is yours." The parenting coordinator later addressed Colin's comment. More importantly, the evaluator asked why a routine mechanical failure had become a message the children believed they needed to carry. The evaluator noticed. So did the therapist. Colin loved them. I have never doubted that, but he also needed their agreement to prove he was the recovered parent and not the dependent man I remembered. When Lacey questioned him, he became cold. When Theo reassured him, he became warm. The children learned the pattern even if Colin refused to name it. Annika's discovery requests reached Belcraft's board. Jocelyn filed an internal report because the company's housing, vehicle, and compensation systems had been used to create a personal legal advantage. The board retained an external auditor. The audit notice changed Colin's posture more than the family court motions had. He had treated Belcraft as an extension of Douglas's approval and his own identity. An independent reviewer meant records could acquire meaning his father did not control. Colin asked Douglas to stop the review. Douglas tried. Company counsel explained that the board now knew enough that cancellation would create its own record. The process would examine benefit authorization, compensation classification, account routing, and the use of corporate communications in personal litigation. Employees were instructed to preserve messages. Access to certain finance folders was logged. Jocelyn sat for an interview in which she had to explain both her refusal to alter the compensation letter and her failure to escalate the approval notice. She did not emerge as a hero. That mattered too. Douglas resisted until counsel explained that ignoring the records could create a larger fiduciary problem. The audit was not about whether Colin had betrayed his wife. It examined authorization, classification, disclosure, and use of company systems. That distinction mattered. I did not need every institution to condemn the same thing. I needed each one to examine the truth within its responsibility. The custody evaluator did the same. She was less interested in who had sacrificed more than in what Lacey and Theo were being asked to carry now. That question moved the center of the case away from Colin and me. It moved it toward our children. The evaluator told Lacey she did not have to choose a parent. That permission changed what Lacey could say. Before reaching that point, the evaluator visited both homes, reviewed school and medical records, and watched each of us with the children. At my duplex, Theo spilled milk and froze with his hands above the table. I handed him a towel and asked him to wipe the floor while I cleaned the table. 10 seconds later, he was talking about dinosaurs. I almost explained that the scene was typical. The evaluator's silence reminded me that ordinary behavior does not need a closing argument. Lacey showed her room without opening the closet, where she had taped the old house photograph. She answered questions politely and looked toward me before every answer. When I told her she could speak privately, relief and guilt arrived on her face together. At Colin's townhouse, she later reported, he prepared pancakes and asked the children to show the evaluator their rooms. He was warm and organized. The problem was not that his home was false. The problem was what happened whenever the children introduced a truth that did not support his version. I did not hear their private conversations. What I learned came through the evaluator's report and the recommendations shared with both parents. Lacey described loving Colin and feeling relieved he survived. She also described how he praised her for understanding adult issues and withdrew when she challenged his account. She had believed maturity meant protecting Theo, protecting me from his fear, and protecting Colin from questions that might upset him. She was 12 years old and had been managing 3 adults. The report included a moment I had not known about. Lacey had asked Colin why he did not tell me insurance returned money. He answered that adults understood financial details she could not, and that asking the question meant she had been influenced. For 2 days afterward, he spoke to her only about logistics. Lacey told the evaluator she apologized even though she still wanted the answer. She believed the apology repaired him. Reading that, I saw the inheritance clearly. Jocelyn had spent a lifetime repairing Colin after truth made him uncomfortable. I had done it in our marriage. Now Lacey was being trained for the same position. The most important thing I could give her was not a better explanation of the reimbursement. It was proof that another person's withdrawal did not create her duty to surrender what she knew. Theo's fear was less articulate and more visible. His stomach hurt before exchanges. He needed the same bag packed in the same order. In counseling, he connected disagreement with danger. Colin had been sick when the family was tense. Therefore, in Theo's mind, making Colin unhappy might make the cancer return. His therapist explained this through a drawing Theo made. 4 stick figures stood beneath a black cloud. In the next panel, 3 figures argued, and the 4th lay in a bed. Theo had drawn an arrow between the argument and the bed. When the therapist asked what the arrow meant, he said, "If we are bad, Dad uses his strength on us and doesn't have enough for cancer." Nobody had taught him that sentence directly. He had assembled it from praise about Colin's strength, warnings not to upset him, and the family's terror during treatment. The therapist gave both parents the same instruction. Cancer must be explained as a medical condition, never as a consequence of emotion or behavior. Disagreement was safe. Adult health was not a child's responsibility. I repeated those ideas at home without mentioning the drawing. Colin complained that the language made ordinary parental authority sound dangerous. The parenting coordinator told him the instruction was not optional. When I learned that, I went into the duplex bathroom, locked the door, and pressed a towel over my mouth so the children would not hear me cry. Colin had not told Theo directly that disobedience caused cancer. Harm does not always arrive as one explicit sentence. Sometimes adults build a pattern and children supply the frightening logic themselves. The evaluator recommended that the children have 1 primary school week residence, a predictable calendar, continued counseling, and strict limits on adult litigation discussions. She found that I had supported their relationship with Colin while he had repeatedly recruited them into his interpretation. Annika asked whether I wanted to seek supervised contact only. There were arguments we could make. Colin had misled the court. He had pressured the children. His own medical history could be presented in the most frightening way possible if we chose to describe every period of confusion and weakness without context. For one night, I wanted to use everything. I wanted the photographs of him unable to stand, the notes about disorientation, and the messages in which he admitted terror. I wanted him to feel what it was like to see care transformed into accusation. Then I imagined Theo reading those filings one day. I imagined Lacey believing truth meant choosing the cruelest available version of someone. No, I told Annika, I want the children primarily with me. I want the communication limits enforced. I want counseling and a structure he cannot manipulate. I do not want to pretend cancer makes him incapable of being their father. Annika studied me for a moment, then crossed out 2 proposed exhibits. This will make our position narrower, she said. It will also make it coherent. We presented the treatment records only where they established the timeline, caregiving demands, and financial necessity. We did not use temporary confusion after CAR-T to imply present incapacity. We did not ask the court to punish remission. At the final evidentiary hearing, Colin's attorney tried to make that restraint disappear. She asked whether I had ever feared leaving the children alone with him during treatment. During acute treatment, yes. So you considered him unsafe. I considered a hospitalized patient with fever and confusion unable to supervise children. That is not his condition now. Colin looked at me then. For 1 second, he seemed surprised I had not used the worst night of his life to win. The surprise did not repair us, but it prevented his method from becoming mine. That decision was not forgiveness. It was the first time I understood that refusing revenge could be a boundary rather than surrender. The Belcraft audit finished 2 weeks later. It confirmed that Colin had used the executive townhouse without complete disclosure of its litigation purpose, attempted to present non-recurring compensation as stable income, and routed personal financial correspondence through company systems. It found no basis for criminal spectacle. It found more than enough for the board to remove him from operational management and begin negotiating a restricted, non-executive ownership or buyout arrangement. The board's decision was delivered in a conference room Colin once controlled. He retained whatever ownership rights the governing documents and final agreement allowed, but he lost authority over staff, discretionary benefits, and financial representations. Any future role would be bounded, documented, and reviewed independently. Douglas asked the board for a probationary return instead. Jocelyn did not support it. He did not misuse the company because procedures were unclear, she said. Procedures became unclear whenever clarity limited him. The minutes preserved her statement. So did Colin. He told relatives that Jocelyn and I had coordinated to take his work and children. Several believed him. I stopped trying to conduct a second trial at every family gathering. People who wanted the story without the records were choosing the comfort of his version. Douglas voted for the action when protecting Colin threatened the company he had built. Colin called it abandonment. Jocelyn called it an accounting. She testified to what she knew and, just as importantly, to what she had not known. She did not inflate her role. She admitted she could have warned me before closing and chose silence. On cross-examination, Colin's attorney suggested Jocelyn disclose the records to secure greater control at Belcraft. My disclosure placed my own judgment under review, she said, and your brother's removal benefited your position. Formal controls benefited my position. My brother's removal was the board's response to his conduct. The distinction sounded cold until I understood it as growth. Jocelyn no longer translated facts into whatever emotion would keep the family together. Outside court, Douglas told her their mother would have been ashamed. Jocelyn's hand moved toward her phone, the old impulse to call him back and soften the injury. Then she put the phone in her bag. Afterward, she asked whether I thought I would ever forgive her. I do not know, I said, but I know I can trust what you said under oath. It was less comfort than she wanted and more honesty than our family system usually allowed. Serena ended her relationship with Colin after her messages were authenticated. She did not come to me seeking friendship. She sent one statement through counsel correcting the timeline Colin had given her. It confirmed he discussed custody in the townhouse before announcing our separation. Her statement did not claim innocence. It said Colin had represented the marriage as functionally over, described the reimbursement as his personal recovery, and assured her the children already understood I would live elsewhere. She acknowledged that she avoided information that might have contradicted him. I did not reply. Serena's exit was a consequence of the records, not a reward for me. Whether she regretted the affair could not restore the days when Colin used her admiration to rehearse my erasure. Colin asked her to reconsider after Belcraft removed him. According to the final message produced, Serena answered that she no longer knew whether any future he described included facts he had not shown her. The relationship ended on the same weakness that created it. Colin needed a witness who knew only the version he selected. Colin lost Serena, his executive authority, and the certainty that Douglas would absorb every consequence. He did not respond with a complete confession. He became angrier, then quieter. At exchanges, he stopped making speeches because the parenting coordinator documented them. Lacey's relationship with him remained cautious. Theo still ran to hug him. Love survived in imperfect forms. Over the following months, the children's transitions became less frightening. Lacey began leaving unfinished homework on the table instead of hiding it. Theo stopped calling Colin to report every meal. They argued over the television like siblings rather than survivors assigned to protect each other. Progress did not move in a straight line. A routine scan for Colin triggered Theo's stomach aches again. Lacey failed a math quiz and hid it because Colin had praised her for being the child who handled things. We brought both moments into counseling and refused to turn relapse of fear into failure. Colin gradually followed the scripts the therapist gave us. He told Theo that medical tests were for doctors and adults to manage. When Lacey disagreed about a school event, he did not cancel the next visit. These were small acts, and part of me resented that basic parenting now counted as progress. The children needed me to notice anyway. At one exchange, Lacey left the townhouse laughing at something Colin had said. She saw me and immediately sobered. "You don't have to change your face when you cross the sidewalk," I told her. She looked back at him, then at me. The smile returned, uncertain, but hers. The final evaluator recommendation favored primary stability in my home with structured, regular time for Colin. By then, the records had done what my sacrifice alone could not. They had made cause visible. The final orders came 16 months after the hotel night. By then, finality no longer felt like one verdict that would tell us who had won. It arrived through findings, schedules, valuations, and duties. I sat beside Annika while the judge spoke and understood that no paragraph could hold every truth of our marriage. The court found that Colin had created a misleading picture of immediate risk by omitting the context of my exhaustion, caregiving, and housing loss. It also found that both children benefited from meaningful relationships with both parents. Those conclusions were not opposites. One described what Colin had done. The other described what the children still needed. When the judge addressed the use of the cancer history, she refused both extremes. Colin's survival did not make him uniquely entitled to stability. My sacrifice did not make me the children's sole owner. Parenting would be measured by present conduct, supported by the documented history. Lacey and Theo would live primarily with me during the school week. Colin and I retained shared legal decision-making, but the order created defined procedures and gave me tie-breaking authority over routine medical and educational matters after consultation. Colin received regular parenting time, divided holidays, and access that did not depend on either child reassuring him. Neither of us could discuss litigation or finances with them. Exchanges followed a neutral routine. Counseling continued. It was not total custody. It was not punishment disguised as protection. It was a structure built around what the children had demonstrated they needed. The written calendar reduced the opportunities for emotional bargaining. Pickup times, holiday rotations, school breaks, travel notice, medical information, and communication windows had defined procedures. If disagreement remained after consultation on routine school or medical matters, I could make the decision and document it. Major issues still required the process the order described. At first, the detail felt demeaning. Married parents do not need a page explaining who collects a child after band practice. Then I remembered how ambiguity had been used. The order did not replace trust. It acknowledged where trust did not exist and prevented the children from becoming messengers across the gap. The financial judgment treated the $214,000 reimbursement as marital property connected to family treatment expenditures. I received the balance that remained traceable. Colin's share of other marital property was charged for money dissipated in preparation for divorce, and he was ordered to bear an appropriate portion of the fees caused by incomplete disclosure. Child support used verified income rather than the compensation picture he tried to create. The court did not return $320,000 to me. $106,000 had genuinely paid for treatment and related care. That money was gone because medicine had been delivered, rooms had been used, specialists had worked, and Colin had lived. The house was gone. The SUV was gone. My rings were gone. Justice did not reverse time. It stopped Colin from owning the meaning of what time had cost. The first transfer under the judgment did not feel triumphant. I paid Annika, reduced the credit balance from the duplex deposit, and reserved taxes and moving costs. The numbers became ordinary obligations again. Colin appealed none of the core findings. His attorney negotiated payment timing and the treatment of his Belcraft interest. Every installment was documented. No one asked me to accept reassurance instead. I kept one copy of the final financial schedule in the blue binder. For months, I opened it whenever I feared the result might somehow vanish. Eventually, I stopped checking. A judgment could secure money. It could not create safety if I spent every day waiting for it to be taken. Belcraft finalized his removal from operations and negotiated a controlled path for his ownership interest. Jocelyn remained controller only after the board created independent reporting and gave her formal authority instead of invisible responsibility. Douglas saw the children under the parenting boundaries and learned that family privacy no longer allowed him to carry messages between households. I did not reconcile with Colin. Our communication narrowed to schedules, school, health, and the practical decisions two parents still had to make. The first time he sent a message saying only, "Theo's cough is better, no fever," I stared at the screen because no accusation followed. I answered, "Thank you." That was the whole exchange. We were not friends. We were not moving toward the warm ending other people preferred because warmth made them less uncomfortable. We were learning a form of cooperation small enough to verify. Jocelyn remained in my life under the same principle. She attended Lacey's school performance and sat 3 rows away from Douglas. She asked before visiting. She never carried messages from Colin. When we discussed the children, she did not ask what the lawyers were doing. Trust returned as behavior, not declaration. He began rebuilding his relationship with Lacey slowly. Some visits went well, some ended with her asking for space. Theo loved him with fewer questions once he understood that cancer was not waiting behind every disagreement. I returned fully to my supervisory role. I bought an inexpensive used car after months of borrowing and public transport. It was not as comfortable as the SUV I sold, but the payment fit my income and the engine started every morning. On the day I bought it, the salesperson tried to persuade me toward a larger model with a longer loan. I calculated the payment, thanked him, and chose the smaller car. The decision was uneventful. That was what made it powerful. I no longer had to turn deprivation into proof of love or spending into proof of recovery. Nadia rode with me to return the sedan she had lent. I handed her the keys and a gift card I could finally afford. "You know this still doesn't settle us," she said. "I know." For once, an open account between people did not frighten me. We stayed in the duplex long enough for it to become a home instead of evidence that we were waiting for one. I learned where the floor creaked. Lacey taped photographs inside her closet. Theo's height marks went on a removable strip because he still feared paint. When the judgment funds became available, I did not search for a copy of the old house. I chose a smaller place inside the school district with a mortgage I could carry on my salary, even if no one rescued me. The kitchen was narrower, the floors were laminate, and the front step held only one person comfortably. Lacey objected to the color of her room. Theo asked whether we could mark his height directly on the wall. Yes, I said. He considered the answer. What if we move? Then we take a photograph, but we are not planning our life around leaving. At closing, a brass key lay on the table beside the documents. It was newer and lighter than the old one. I turned it once in the lock when we arrived. I did not need to turn it 3 times to prove the house belonged to me. The day we moved, Jocelyn brought boxes and left before Colin arrived for his scheduled time. She and I had become careful allies. Some wounds had closed, the house closing had not. There was no new romance waiting to prove I was desirable. I no longer needed another person's selection to correct Colin's insult. Some evenings were lonely. Freedom did not transform every silence into peace. I missed the Colin who ruined pancakes and tried to repair sinks. I missed a marriage that had been real before it became dangerous to trust. Allowing those memories did not require me to reopen the door. Grief was no longer evidence that I had made the wrong decision. It was evidence that something worth mourning had ended. The first Sunday in the new house, Lacey mixed pancake batter while Theo placed 1 chocolate chip in the center of each circle. Dad lets me use 3, he said. Then Dad is reckless, Lacey replied. He laughed. The ritual belonged to neither parent. That was why it could still belong to them. We ate at the small kitchen table. Lacey complained about a group project. Theo asked whether his single chocolate chip rule could become 2 on birthdays. Nobody monitored my face before laughing. After breakfast, they argued about whose turn it was to rinse the plates. I let the argument remain ordinary. I did not step in until syrup reached the floor. For years, I had imagined safety as the absence of disorder. Now I knew it could also be a room where disorder did not threaten anyone's place in the family. Months later, after an ordinary Sunday exchange, Colin stood on the front step and confirmed the next pickup time. He did not ask to enter. I did not explain why the children's shoes were scattered behind me or why I had chosen that neighborhood. He left. Inside, Lacey was at the kitchen table finishing homework. Theo was rinsing syrup from a plate and using too much water. The blue treatment binder rested closed on a high shelf. I had placed the obsolete brass key inside it, beside the hotel key card from the night Jocelyn knocked. 1 key opened a home that no longer belonged to me. The other had opened a room where truth arrived from outside. Neither one controlled where I lived now. I turned the new front door lock from the inside.